A growing group of attorneys is opposing Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation. More than 2,400 of them signed an open letter to the Senate saying his behavior at last week's hearing should disqualify him. Here's a portion of it. We are united as professors of law and scholars of judicial institutions in believing that he did not display the impartiality and judicial temperament requisite to sit on the highest court of our land. Those professors, they're not alone. The ACLU broke with tradition and also formally opposed Kavanaugh, that group saying it couldn't stay silent due to the stakes and the credible allegations against him. Add to that, John Paul Stevens, the retired Supreme Court justice and lifelong Republican, saying Kavanaugh doesn't belong on the high court because he lacks the proper temperament for the job. Plus, Judge Kavanaugh, he will not be teaching at Harvard Law School next year. Now, Kavanaugh said he withdrew, but it also comes in the wake of student protests of Kavanaugh and that 40 law school professors at the school did sign that open letter. CUNY Law professor Alan White, he also signed it, and he joins us now. Professor, thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You know, when I went through the letter, a few things jumped out, and we'll get to the temperament in a second, but you said that the judge exhibited a lack of commitment to judicious inquiry. You mean what by that?
So I think that the reaction that many of us have, and it's really a significant number of law professors, there are about 10,000 law professors in the country, so recognize that almost 1 in 4, maybe almost 1 in 3 law professors have signed on to this really unprecedented letter. I think it was really the prepared statement reflected this really sharp partisan rhetoric that in many ways violated fundamental norms that we try and teach, norms of the profession, norms that we try and teach our students.
You believe that even if confirmed that there'd be issues, and like a lot of your colleagues who signed this letter, you go before different courts in this land, including both federal, district, and even Supreme Courts, and there are statutes governing bias and recusal, and in that prepared statement, Brett Kavanaugh laid out in explicit detail that he thought that there was a giant conspiracy fueled by the opposing party, the Democratic Party, financial interests, and even the Clintons, all complicit in it. You think that just doesn't go away with an apology and an op-ed, that carries consequences here where he'd have to remove himself from a multitude of cases?
Well, that's correct. It's obviously an important, a vital part of judicial temperament and judicial behavior to not show bias and to be very reflective about your own biases. We all have, obviously, biases that we grow up with, that we're born with, but what we try and teach future lawyers and certainly future judges is to be aware of those and try and not express those, particularly in this kind of a context. And so the combination of both expressing the bias and being completely unreflective about those biases he harbors do seem to us to give reasonable grounds for many people who appear in front of him to challenge his neutrality and objectivity as a judge.
You probably saw the op-ed that Brett Kavanaugh penned at the Wall Street Journal where, in short, he said, sorry, I said some things I shouldn't have. I took a tone that was more strident than I intended. And also, on the other side of this, we saw John Paul Stevens, retired Supreme Court justice, break from his historical precedent or pattern here and speak about an ongoing confirmation process for a sitting judge, saying because of his temperament issues, he wasn't qualified. So what do you make of what Justice Stevens said? And also conversely, do you cut some slack to Brett Kavanaugh that he said, hey, you know, I may have gone too far?
Well, starting with Justice Stevens' comments, I think those are very much in line with the reaction that so many of us law professors had. As far as the Wall Street Journal editorial, it seems a very half-hearted apology, if you can call it an apology at all. To say you said things you shouldn't have, he doesn't clearly, it doesn't strike me as showing the kind of reflection about bias and incivility that you would want to see in a judge, and the kind of reflection we try and encourage our students to engage in.
Finally, Professor, to put in context about the consequences potentially of this, you know, I think with how jaded the American public is, maybe even for good reason, about Washington. They clearly look at Congress and the presidency as two branches here that are hyper-partisan. But the hope was that you had a Supreme Court of the judiciary branch that was impartial umpires as best as we can. We're all humans, and more than that, there's political appointees. I get that. But still, that they'd be fair judges at the end of the day and not politicians first and foremost. What is the risk, if confirmed, that we've somehow gone to a different standard for judges for the highest court of the land, and that the public should look at that third branch of the judiciary as no different than the other two?
That's a profoundly disturbing risk. It's been the tradition on the Supreme Court that even judges who have very different ideological frameworks, for example, Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsburg, are able to have dialogue, are able to engage in civil discussions, that there isn't a Democratic wing and a Republican wing of the Supreme Court. And I think that the kind of rhetoric Judge Kavanaugh has employed in these hearings could seriously undermine or further undermine the public's confidence in that aspect of the Supreme Court as one of our hopefully less divided and less partisan institutions.
Well, Professor, we will, as you I'm sure as well, will look with great interest what happens this weekend with the final vote in the offing. But as you said, the consequences go far beyond an up and down vote here, as this process hopefully does not become the new normal. Professor Alan White, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, coming up next, I promise we're going to leave the world of confirmations and judges and everything else and pivot to the world of sports. We're going to head up to Boston for a live look in at Game 1 of the ALDS, where the Yankees are facing the Red Sox tonight.